Okay, so this is a video of a walkthrough of art history, and this is week 25, even though this video is actually supposed to be for week 24, so, but it's the same thing. And I'm going to try to combine the two videos into one, so you just have to watch one thing this week. And I'm going to try to make it brief and quick. The Renaissance period, which is the first one, is going to have a little more information in it. So it's going to be the longest one. So if you listen to the first part and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so long. Well, the other ones aren't near as long. So just the first Renaissance section is going to be a little bit long to give you a history base to start off of. So if you can see, this is the 1400s, and that's an estimate. It's about the 1400s to the 1854 is where we're going to go to. So we're going to cover a long time. We're going to cover the Renaissance, which, like I said, is going to have the most information in it. Then the Baroque period, Rococo, Romanticism, Academic, Realism, and pre-Raphaelite art. I always have a hard time saying that. And yes, that does have to do with Raphael, not the Ninja Turtle. This is the artist. But he did get his name from him. And it says Raphaelite art because it actually, the people that are here decide we're going to go way back up here before the Renaissance, and we like that kind of art the best, so we're going to bring it back. Let's like bring them back to 60s. So all right, so let's get started. The first one is the Renaissance art period. Okay, so let me tell you first off, this involved, I'm not going to break them up into pieces because I think that would just take way too long to talk about all of them, but it involves several different times. Part of the Gothic time, the early Renaissance, the High Renaissance, the late Renaissance, which is also called Mannerism, which is a really cool time period, but we're not going to talk about any of these specifically. We're going to just stick to talking about the Renaissance and group them all into one. So whenever you think of Renaissance, remember that's probably talking about lots of different little periods that are grouped together, that people kind of called the Renaissance. So uh, let's see. The Renaissance is a period in European history. All of this, of course, takes place over there across the seas. You know, where y'all been studying about from history, in France, Italy, Rome, the Roman area, England, all those places. So, uh, it's the transition from the Middle Ages to what is known as modern times. Okay, so this is a really important transitional period. Renaissance period was a big transitional period. And again, that's probably why it took up so many, because to make a huge transition in society, it takes a little while. And it usually takes lots of little boost of things happening. So that's why this one had so many different things that involved that are related to it. Um, it began in Italy, and it kind of moved around from there, and it was a movement of thought within the culture rather than a program of like a small elite group of people. So it wasn't just some one guy or a group of guys that started this. It was kind of like a whole cultural thing that happened. And the humanism was one of the main ideals that developed. So this is where humanism started. It was an attempt to revive the culture's history, legacy, and passion for literary works. Literary means literature. So they wanted to bring back a recognition to all the different cool books of history and stuff that they had gotten from the Greek and Roman people. Um, so it's no surprise then that some of the first humanists were collectors of ancient manuscripts and ancient Greek and Roman scrolls. They started really putting a big value on these things and collecting them at this point. And a lot of them were pretty happy because as they started developing an educational system, this is when like a big, I don't know if you want to call it the beginning of public education, but it sure gave it a good start, where they wanted to start making it to where everybody could read and write, not just the high uppity up people that had all the money and could afford it. You know, they wanted everybody to be able to do that. So they started all these schools and stuff. And it made a lot of Greek people come in, and they were like, yes, please come in and teach us because you can read Greek and not everybody here can. So yeah, be a teacher. That would be awesome. So a lot of people came in to teach from the Greek places at these schools and stuff. So this idea of the humanist educational program took off really fast. Everybody loved it. And it spread around from different cities. And even a lot of the high officials in the Catholic Church were humanists. And they had huge libraries. So people just started getting lots of libraries at this point and collecting stuff. And a lot of the popes even authored books that were for children education. So the church was a big uh, supporter of this new educational movement. Now, after Constantinople and at the end of the Byzantine Empire, which y'all read about that, right? There were great groups of Greek scholars that started migrating to the area, like I said, and everybody really welcomed them. And uh, so they also started studying there as humanists. And the rediscovery of classical philosophy and science would also start to challenge traditional religious beliefs. So here's where there started being some problems. The church started really not liking it quite as much because all these new ideas made a lot of people feel like before they were like, oh, well, we can't talk about that because that might be against the Bible, or that might upset the church, or well, because of all this new philosophy and new ideas of thinking and branching out to new thought and everything, they felt confident that they could start doing that. So people started questioning the church, whereas they used to not. And I know y'all know Martin Luther and his thesis that he put up on the door. That happened during this time because people were thinking about new stuff, and question, well, is this really right? Is this really the best way to do things? So anyway, you had a couple of people that got in there and started just saying, well, we should put all this religion into one. There's something common in all religions, and we can find that, and we could all be unified. And there's a lot of crazy ideas going on that we're not going to really get into all that. But um, if you wanted to, let's see, what's the guy's name? It was Marcello Ficino, and he was from this period too. And he wanted to join Platonism with Christianity. But that really didn't go over very well and didn't happen. And there was also uh, Hermetism also became popular. And the guy that started that said that there's a commonality in all religions, and if you can find that, then you can unite a lot of stuff, all the beliefs and stuff. And he was really into like the chemical makeup of things around him too. And he actually was a forerunner for chemistry, is his whole religion that he started. So anyway, the Protestant Reformation began now, like with the thesis that was put up on the board. The Council of Trent met, and the church started a counter-reformation. This is when the Reformation started. The church went against that and said, oh, well, we're going to fight against that, and here's our counter-reformation. And art was really challenged in this time, and art was used for a lot of different stuff. It was being influenced by the increased awareness of nature, revival of classical learning, and the more individualistic view of people. So because the church was starting to use art to reach out to people, like evangelize people, and because still at this point a lot of people couldn't actually read that well. So like it says down here, those that started straying from the church too, they would use art to try to convict them of things. um, that didn't always work, but sometimes it did. And as we see in the next period, that's going to intensify as more and more people start forming other beliefs and other churches and other groups, and straying from the church and doubting the church. They're going to up the ante a little bit with that. Um, so anyway, let's a lot of these stuff I will say real quick. A lot of these things were seen inside churches. Let me see if that's the next slide. Let me see. No, I didn't. But anyway, okay, so here is like the beginning of the Renaissance movement back in the Gothic time. And you can see how it began to change, but it was still religious based, okay? To the High Renaissance, and then we come over here to the end of the Renaissance period, and we can start to see how the perspective of things are changing, how the painting style is changing a little bit. And this is just a portrait. And this will also kind of lead you into the next thing. You can also notice right here how everything's, especially this one with the School of Athens here with Plato and Aristotle. Oh, what's his name? Yeah, Raphael painted this. And a lot of the paintings are characterized by having lots of people in them. Okay, lots of people. And they really focused on expression and how the people had their faces and stuff like that. So let's move on. Oh yeah, I do have a picture. Here it is. This is the actual painting on a wall, and that's where a lot of the paintings were, and that's why we can still see them today, because a lot of them are painted inside buildings of the church and stuff. So thankfully they did that, and we can still see them. And these are called frescoes. Okay, the Baroque period. This art became independent from the church, what meant artists had more options for the subject matter. Okay, now we're going to start moving a little bit faster, so y'all try to keep up. Since the before the church was like the main payer of artists, okay, they're the only one that could afford it because of the class system and stuff, and how there was mostly either you were rich or you were poor. That was it. Poor people couldn't afford it, so only the rich people got it, and the church had a lot of money and it was part of the government, so they hired most of the artists. But now, due to the Renaissance, letting people start branching out, and people started seeing wealth right here as a blessing from God, because the church would always tell them, you know what, it's better to be poor because that means you're humble. So poor is better. But now people started questioning that. Well, so that made people start to have another class in their society. It's the middle class, okay? And now because of humanism and stuff, and people started putting more of an emphasis on nature. Now artwork, and they were getting separated from the church more. You didn't have to have human figures, and you could have it had still life and more nature scenes. And another thing that characterizes this artwork in this period, and you can see if we'll go back to this one right here, that it started having more dramatic lighting, okay? And see that started happening. And we'll travel back over here. Okay, so it started having more dramatic lighting and also more gripping scenes. And this is where the church started getting more bold with what they showed. And they wanted more religious stuff with scenes that could maybe cause people to repent, change their mind, come back to the church. So here's a couple of things from the Baroque period. You notice again the lighting and how things look kind of like it's on a stage, and it's kind of dramatic. And so here's some still life. That means just objects that are still and they don't move, and you paint them. And here is some scenes from a family. Here's another scene, and it's all black in the backgrounds. You don't see a lot of detail in the background. It kind of all fades out. A lot of their pictures were like that. Let's see. Let's move on. So the Rococo art period. Okay. This was a response to the seriousness of the Baroque period that we just went to. Okay, so they wanted to portray a lot of real life back then that was, scenes from things that were happening. Uh, and they were, serious about their art at that time. But this artwork here had some people call it the late Baroque period also, which meant artists had more options for subject matter in a new free market. Um, okay, so that is a typo. Also known as the Baroque period, the late Baroque period. This shouldn't be there. I guess I left it. So don't worry about that. The free market's already there, and yes, that did influence things, but this isn't when the free market came out. It came out before, started in the Renaissance. So, but artwork had a softer, graceful, and more playful feel, as you can see here. Okay, the artwork is a bit softer, a little more playful. You got people kind of looking like they're having a better time. It looks a little more fanciful, wistful, things like that. And it's not as dramatic and disturbing as some of the artwork here, like all the dead animals and stuff. And here, this guy's dead, which I don't know if that's Jesus or Lazarus. Probably Jesus, because I think this is a cross. And so anyway, I didn't show too much of the disturbing ones, but and the artwork included decorations and even artwork that had more ornamental feel to it. So a lot of people use these for decorations in their home to make their home look nicer. And they even, as you'll be able to see right here, right here, okay, that here they used it to do decorations in their facilities as well, in their houses and cathedrals and things like that. So it's really decorative, fun kind of a movement. I really like all this. It's just softer. It looks more pastel, and it's just scenes that make you feel a little better, you know. So that was the Rococo period. Now, not everybody liked that, and if you'll notice, every period is kind of a like, everybody was like, well, I don't like what's going on now, so I'm going to change it to something else. They always found something they didn't like about an art period, and they were like, I'm going to do something different. So it started in a new period, and that's kind of how the whole thing went. So a lot of people were like, this is kind of silly. We're not going to do all this. We need to do something that has some more meaning to it, and something that really pulls in the depths of your heart here. We don't want to just be shallow and ornamental like the Rococo period. We're going to do something that's meaningful. So the Romanticism period came in. Artists valued expression of emotion more than the control of classicism, which I skipped a period in between these, okay? After the Rococo art, because everybody was all like fun and games with that, the classicism came in, and they said, no, we got to be serious with this stuff. So it was more serious, and rules of art, you got to do it this way, you got to do it like this, stop being all silly with it. And then Romanticism came in. We didn't talk about classicism, so but that's in between here. Then Romanticism came in, and they were like, you know what? I like this, but you know, that's a little too intense for me as far as how to do art. You're trying to control it too much. So let's do it more emotional based. Let's make art that appeals to the emotion. And let's have artists, they can remember something or think of something, but then they need to draw from their feelings inside to put that into their artwork so it draws feelings from people that see it. So they valued expression of emotion more than control that was taught in classicism, saying feeling is the law, especially the really intense ones like emotions of horror, terror, and awe. Yeah, we're going to see some pretty gruesome stuff in a minute. Not too bad, but so parents, not too bad. So it influenced society in more ways than just its artwork. It was also influenced the literary stuff, which is the writing, musical, and intellectual movement. And the movement wanted to examine emotions on a deeper level. So they painted scenes of human personality and its moods and the potential mental states. It was kind of experimental in a way because they were seeing what kind of mental states and stuff they could actually put on the artwork and see how deep they could go into portraying human emotion in things and creating human emotions in the people that looked at it. So the focus on the art is creative intuition, okay, when making artwork. That's what it focused on. That everyone has this intuition inside of them. You got to pull that out, that creative intuition for doing art. Just let it flow. Let it flow. So, and they blinded. It's supposed to be blended. There's another mistake. I'll fix that. Blended emotions with history. So they took a lot of historical things and really added some emotional stuff to it. Now, parents, or if you're sitting here and you're a little kid watching, there's going to be some blood on the next one. So parents, if you want to look at it first, you can look at it first real quick before your kids do, or you can look at it. A couple of people don't have clothes on, but you can't really see much. So just warning about that. Okay, so let's look at some of the artwork from this period. Okay, we have lots of, if you notice, battle scenes. Okay, lots of intense stuff happening here. This is quite different from the girl swinging happily on the swing, you know, in the middle of the garden with lots of flowers. Okay, it's totally different artwork. And so, as you can see, it's historical events. These two up here are Spanish, from a Spanish painter. And so there's a lot of Spanish history right here. And this one's pretty graphic. You got a lot of people on this boat, and they're dying or dead already, and it's a pretty desperate situation there. And here's just some history. One of a leader that was riding and during a battle, and you see all the horses here back here. So he's in the middle of a battle, and they really made this an emotional picture. You can see the horse in mid leap and stuff, and he's got his sword. He's looking back, and there's a lot of stuff happening right here. And love that leopard skin saddle thing there. And this one too, you got two people fighting. It looks like they're both dying here because one's already got a sword in him and the other's about to. And here's some poor guy under the horse's feet that didn't make it. There's his sword. Uh, so anyway, there's a lot of intensity in the Romantic period. Okay. Academic art period. We got a couple more. The academic art, also known as academics. I'm not even gonna try to say that right. Uh, I I can't do it. Okay, but you can read it. Artwork was only produced through special academies, schools of art, which controlled all aspects of the artwork. So they got to a point where I guess these people they just wanted control over the art because art was a really big thing back then. And they said, look, only the real artists go here. So they established the difference between artists, intellectual artists, and those second-hand artists who did art as manual labor to make a living, which artists always did that. They made a living. And then all of a sudden, well, we got this school, like a college, if you want to say, for art, and we're going to teach you how to do it intellectually, the real art, the real professional artist, okay? So the academies had one facility called the Salon de Paris, which became one of the biggest art events in the world. Like this place, like you go to an art gallery. This was a giant art gallery. It's one of the biggest art events ever that they did, and anybody who's anybody in art would have their art displayed there. If you got accepted into the school, it was like the equivalent of a music person that's wanting to become a musician getting a record deal. Okay, so it was a pretty big deal for them. The academies were established during the time of neoclassicism and romanticism, okay, the ones that we talked about earlier. Um, these two periods. This right here is happening at the same time as that really intense art and the one that we didn't talk about, the classicism, where they are real precise about everything they did. And so they kind of took on those styles because it was happening at the same time. And they borrowed Baroque themes as well, the one with all the shadows and stuff and the still lifes. So they borrowed all of these things that was happening around them and said, this is the real way to do it. This is where you come here and we'll teach you top-notch stuff and you'll be a real artist here. Not just one of those that have to work for a living and do art. Okay. And so here's some of the stuff. You can see that they did borrow. Here's some that look a little bit like the Baroque period because of the shadow in it, right? And here's some that looks a lot like the Romanticism, the Romantic thing, because it has all the people and there's a lot of commotion going on here. This is when a ruler's coming through town. But they also did a lot of the classicism. These two look a little bit more like the classicism style, and they're very precise, very precisioned, very perfect looking. Okay. And so they would even take out any flaws that they saw, and it would be a very beautiful piece of art. Now, personally, I just like this because it looks so pretty to me. But a lot of people didn't like that. So said it was too controlled, too precise, too perfect. So let's move on. So realism, okay? This is a pretty important time period. It happened while these art colleges and stuff were going on, and people were starting to think, well, I'm not really an artist unless I go here, and only the real artists go there. And that was really the only one that started being bought, and nobody wanted artwork as much if it wasn't from the establishment, at the institution, as it were. But realism was never an actual group. It was recognized because it was the first idea after the academies took over that was anti-institution. Okay, so they were not for the academies at all. Okay, they did not want that, and they thought that because the academies, what they were doing, the art schools, they weren't paying any attention to what was happening in the society and the culture. And what was going on right now was the Industrial Revolution. So much was changing, and there was nobody painting about it. So these people are like, hey, The establishment is just a stuck-up group of people that are not paying any attention to real life. So we need to get back here and paint some real life stuff. Okay? And people thought art should reflect real life, not an academy's teaching. So if we look, here's some people gleaning in the fields there, picking stuff up. Here's some of the art from the realism period. Here's some guys breaking up some stones and doing stuff. Here's another one. This is a really cool piece because he was a doctor, and this is how doctors learned back then. You know, this is, whoops, went forward, weren't supposed to. I don't know if this guy is alive or dead. Probably alive because these people are kind of shocked looking at what's happening. This is a real surgery, it looks like, going on under the supervision of this guy. This picture was actually painted as dedication to him as a professor of this doctor school here. And here's another one. Here's some more people praying over the harvest. I don't know if it's because they don't really have much and they're asking God for help or what. I'm not sure. And here's another one that shows some of the daily life that was taking place. And they all look a little different because different artists of that time painted them, so there's different styles to their artwork, okay? All right, let's move on. The pre-Raphaelite art period. I always have a hard time with that word. It's a branch off of realism painters. So you had these realism painters that we just talked about that were like, I don't like the establishment, I don't like the school controlling everything. And some of them decided, you know what, we're going to form a brotherhood. And they did. It was a group of guys. Started out with just 3, and then it spread to 7. And they decided that the painters before the Renaissance painted and sculpted and did stuff with the human body and nature that was more realistic than any other period of movement. And so they redefined the way art was presented at the time, especially when it came to detail and meanings. So like other art, they weren't super, super big on super clear details, but they became really clear on the details. And they wanted to go back to that style from a way long time ago, from before we started talking about the history today. And so here's some of the stuff. And also their artwork had a lot of meaning to it. It was meaningful. It depicted it had a lot of good characteristics from all the time periods, but they went back to the style of the pre-Renaissance period and or the early Renaissance. And so here's one. This is supposed to be a girl that kind of realized about salvation and God, and she came to an understanding about that suddenly. I guess from maybe doing some of their songs or whatever. I don't know. Here's another one, The Shadow of Death. This is really cool because there's Christ and he's not on the cross yet, but look back here. It's the workshop with the nails, and here is a scarf thing, his crown. And so it's kind of, this is kind of neat. And the mother, she just notices that and she's looking back there. And here's some others. This is another one of Jesus when he was young. So there's still religious themes to it, but they just decided they were going to go back to the original stuff. So now that we're done talking about it, you need to pick your time period, okay? The Renaissance, remember, focused on people and expressions, perspectives, and it was religious. Or the perspective, I mean, they started using perspective at that time suddenly, as far as distance in their paintings and stuff, and you could see hallways and buildings and things like that. They would use a lot of perspective. So if you want to do one of these type of things, you could pick the Renaissance period. If you like being like serious artwork, having a lot of diversity, they did still life, remember, because they kind of broke out of the church. They did a lot of nature landscapes with the people weren't so emphasized anymore. The person was small, the landscape was big instead of a focus on the person. And they also did religious art too. So if you like doing landscapes or still life, this would be the period you want to pick. Rococo, remember that was the elegant, soft, playful scenes that were not quite as serious as the Baroque period. And then you have Romanticism, which was very emotional, intense scenes. If you want to do a battle scene or something that's really sad or, you know, whatever, surprising, you know, this would be the one for you, or a historical scene. We're not going to worry about academic art. That's going to be a little too difficult to try and do anything with that because it was taught by the academies, and we're not going to get into what they taught today. Um, Realism, that has a lot of current life situations, the good, bad, or the ugly. So beautiful stuff or not so beautiful stuff, like if someone uh, was having a really hard time. So if you have like, I don't know, like back then they might have had people starving or something because the crops were bad or there was a drought, you know, they probably would have painted that even though it's not very nice to see people that are starving, they would have put it. Um, or pre-Raphaelite art, yeah, I said it. Um, Details, even the smallest parts of the picture, there was a message in it, and a lot of them were religious. So if you want some type of a message in your artwork, and you like a lot of detail, little meticulous things, then this one's going to be good for you. Okay, so that's it. Go ahead and let's see. Okay, so we're done. Here's my slideshow. So go ahead and decide which one of those periods you want to have. Here they are again. And let me see if I can get back to the original. There we go. Okay, so we're done. Pick your time period and create a sketch of that, and we will check the sketch out next Tuesday when you come to class. Well, I'll make sure it has the right content and that the time period you picked is correct for your sketch and things like that. So I can't wait to see your sketch. Remember, do your worksheet also. If you haven't already done that, you can uh, kind of scroll, you can kind of move through this video if you need to again to look at some of the main pages that have the information for each period, and that will help you out. And go ahead and do your matching. Bring that next week as well. So we'll see you Tuesday. Bye.